So we have joining us, I mentioned as we started the show, I want to introduce this gentleman. I think we haven't had him on the show before, but he's with Center for Security Policy. His name is J. Michael Waller. He'll be joining us in just a moment. He's a senior analyst for strategy at the Center for Security Policy. And if you listen to my show very often, you know I've had numerous other experts. I have the deepest respect for the Center for Security Policy. Its founder, Frank Gaffney, its current leader, Fred Fleitz, numerous other experts from that organization. This gentleman, why I want him to ask him to come on today, I was grateful he was available, is to talk about something the Center for Security Policy created, and is available online, which is their Center for Security Policy National Security Voter Guide. It runs through serious national security issues and analyzes Vice President Biden and his record, his long track record of being in the Senate and being vice president versus President Trump on these measures, essentially, of how good will you be on national security. The reason I wanted to talk about this today is because I think that some voters and people who are just too busy to spend a lot of time thinking about politics are kind of driven in their vote, or they may find themselves voting a certain way simply because in the last 30 days, the news cycle has been on one issue, or maybe it's been on COVID or some other issue, and that issue is going to drive their vote. And really, you have many, many issues to be thinking about in choosing the next commander-in-chief. So, J. Michael Waller joining us. He has a PhD in International Security Affairs from the University Professors Program at Boston University. He's a former Walter and Lenore Annenberg Professor of International Communication at the Institute of World Politics. He's also the co-founder of the Blue Team on China in the 1990s. For 13 years, he was a Walter and Leonore Annenberg Professor of International Communications at the Institute of World Politics in Washington. And this is a really cool thing where he designed and taught the world's only graduate program on public diplomacy and political warfare. I could keep reading his resume, but I'd rather start talking to him. So please, we're going to join and welcome to our show, J. Michael Waller. Hi.
Hey, Debbie. Hi, how are you?
I'm well. How are you, sir?
Doing great here in Washington, D.C. to the extent somebody can.
Yeah, yep. It's a wild place to be. Well, I love that the Center for Security Policy, and I say this quite often about Frank Gaffney and currently Fred Fleitz, I love what the center does in terms of when we see issues that challenge America, or they're of great concern, instead of just lamenting or hand-wringing, they dive into action and try to think of how do we address this, what could solve this, what experts can address these issues, and they put out information for the public. And so I'm frequently referring people to the center's website. But this thing you guys did, 10 national security issues show stark differences between the candidates. It was a great, great contribution to the political conversation. So love that. Thank you for doing it.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it was a good job. It was a team effort. We just basically looked at Joe Biden's record and Donald Trump's record and did what they wrote, what they actually did, and not what they say they're going to do.
That's a very important one. I'll tell you, I have some of these marked with my happy little stickies here. I'm going to run through as many as I can. I want to start, though, on the very first one, support and defend the Constitution. And you don't know about my show, but on this show, I'm frequently talking about the Constitution is kind of like the pillars that hold up a bridge, over a bay or something. They hold America in place. If you don't have honoring the Constitution, if you chip away at it, you end up chipping away at the very structure of America. So tell us your thoughts about Joe Biden versus Donald Trump in terms of defending the Constitution.
Well, here's the thing, just as you said, if we don't have a Constitution, we don't have a country. And if we have people constantly reinterpreting our Constitution into something it isn't, we don't have America anymore. So that's the very first national security priority we have. Who wants to keep and preserve our Constitution the way our founders intended for it to be with the Bill of Rights? So Joe Biden, he was on the Senate Judiciary Committee for decades as a senator. He was one of the main people. Remember, he was the one who grilled Clarence Thomas and tried to destroy him as a person when he was being confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So Joe Biden has a way of savaging anyone who supports original founders' intent in the Constitution.
I think that issue alone is dispositive about in terms of who defends the Constitution. And it's very interesting because right now, of course, we're going to be in the midst of the Amy Coney Barrett confirmation proceedings in the Senate. And the same theme it isn't just Joe Biden. It comes from the leftism of today's. I know that you're not partisan, but it comes from the leftist ideology that just says the Constitution kind of gets in the way of the agenda that the left wants, and so people who are going to be strict constitutionalists interfere with the leftist agenda. So I love that point. I love that point, especially about Joe Biden. I'd forgotten he was the one who really, really grilled Clarence Thomas. He was brutal.
Yeah, tried to destroy him. So when you have somebody running for president with a track record like Joe Biden's of ripping up the Constitution and using it as a political weapon to push an agenda rather than to preserve the original intent of the founders of our country, you have someone who cannot uphold his oath to defend the Constitution of the United States.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. And yeah, it's kind of a funny thing. This is getting a little sidetracked, but back to when President Obama was first elected, so it was Obama, Biden, the first term, I recall at that time, there were many Americans who, for the first time, maybe in decades, started to look at and go back to and read again the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, because there was a growing sense, even early on in the first term of their administration, that these people just had a different agenda than perpetuating America as founded on the Constitution. A lot of thought about, are they allowed to do these things? Can they really do that? Don't we have some protections here? Do you recall that at all, that kind of renewed interest in the Constitution?
Yeah, because it was sort of almost universally accepted for a long time that the Constitution's a living document, and that it changes when society changes, or say when some foreign country runs a propaganda campaign to change our attitudes, to make us change our Constitution. So if that's the approach that we really took as a people for a very long time, with just a small minority of people saying, no, we have to stick to founding principles, we would have lost our country a long time ago had we maintained that course.
Absolutely. I want to jump to number 3. And again, we're going through your Center for Security Policy National Security Voter Guide. Number 3 has to do with making America safe from bio threats. And this is obviously front and center in the news because of COVID, because of coronavirus, and coming from China. So how did you assess how Vice President Biden versus President Trump score or should be assessed on protecting us from bio threats?
Well, think of this. When Joe Biden was a senator, the very building where he had his committee room, the Hart Senate office building, was subject to an anthrax attack after 9/11. Now, you would think an anthrax attack on your very building in the institutions where you spent decades, you'd think that would be a real impetus to go ahead and say, gee, maybe we should have a national biodefense strategy to protect all of us. He never did anything like that. He was in the perfect place to do that as a senior member of the Judiciary Committee and the Foreign Relations Committee. And then even when he came in as vice president under Obama, Obama did go through some bio-threat strategy that they put together, but it wasn't a strategy. It was just a list of check the boxes type things to make it look like it was a strategy, but there was no way to implement it. There was no way to safeguard the country against it. So here he'd blown his years in the Senate and his 8 years as vice president. Well, remember, Obama picked him because of his national security portfolio. That was Obama's weak point. That's why he picked Joe Biden in the first place.
Right.
So Biden blew his entire career when it concerned him personally, and never brought the nation any closer to defending against bio threats. And even worse, he built up the Chinese Communist Party. Look at his Senate record and his vice president record of giving concession after concession after concession, decade after decade, to the Chinese Communist Party, regardless of what it did to our country. And of course, who's the entity responsible for this present virus and pandemic? It's the Chinese Communist Party. And Biden won't even lay blame on the Chinese Communist Party for this. Instead, he's blaming Donald Trump. So right there you have it. He has zero. You have to give him a 0 on defending the nation against bio threats. Meanwhile, President Trump, even before the pandemic, I think it was 2 years ago, set up a national bio defense strategy. It's right there. I think we posted it on our website in that item number 3 on the voting guide. But you can read the actual strategy. And then he had a whole task force set up to implement us and get us moving toward a biodefense strategy.
I love that, and I love this. Actually, is worth a little more exploring. First of all, that was my very next question was about how, as America realized that the coronavirus we learned early on came from China. Then there is speculation about whether it was negligently released, intentionally released, and however it was developed is still open to question. And all this time, as President Trump has been willing to lay blame toward the Chinese Communist Party, you've had the left, especially in the form of Joe Biden, acting as though that is kind of unstatesmanlike or unseemly or unnecessary. And it actually seems like he's kind of signaling, I won't lay blame at the very entity who's responsible. And I think that all by itself is a danger signal about him and national security. You agree?
Oh, sure. Think of what that's telling the Chinese Communist leadership.
Yeah.
They can get away with mass murder and making the leadership of our country ill with a virus that escaped from one of their labs. Now, again, if it was deliberate or if it was accidental, it really doesn't matter. Was it first degree murder or was it negligent homicide? It was. You still have responsibility for it. It's just the degree of punishment you should get in return. And Biden never has once laid blame on Xi Jinping. Never has once asked the Chinese Communist Party leadership for an open international investigation into the Chinese Communist Party labs where the virus escaped from. Never once. Instead, the day President Trump protected the country by announcing the travel restrictions from China to prevent the virus from spreading here, that very day, Biden said Trump was a racist and a xenophobe for pursuing this policy, holding China accountable and for blocking traffic into the United States from China. Racist and xenophobic. And Nancy Pelosi said the same thing the same day. And he's kept that theme ever since.
It is truly amazing. It's so great. This is a great conversation because you're jumping right to my next point. But I was going to say that point. Well, it's about leftism. It is like that foreign policy for America is supposed to be turning on the whole question of what's politically correct, what will be acceptable to the world community, we don't want to sound unfriendly to the world. It is to me a childish and it's not protective of America if you can't point the finger of blame at the Chinese Communist Party. And I even noticed the political correctness thing got in there when there was a lot of discussion about, well, you can't really blame China because then maybe people will blame all the Chinese people, or maybe people will blame Americans of Chinese descent. All a politically correct pivot away from the reality that as a leader, you better blame and target the person or entity that's responsible, which was the party, not the poor, innocent Chinese people who also suffered from this virus.
Sure. And this is the whole point. By targeting the party itself, Donald Trump made a big distinction between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people. But Joe Biden couldn't even blame the Chinese Communist Party.
Right. I mean, and the whole context of the Chinese Communist Party we've had under President Trump, of course, the willingness is unrelated to national security, but the effort and determination under President Trump to redo our trade deals with China and other countries, to stand strong for America, even when it was challenging what people kind of accepted as, well, this is how China does things. They always steal our secrets. They always steal our copyright. We kind of let things go for decades. And President Trump came along and said, why? Why exactly do we do this? It's fabulous leadership. Okay, another item you have on here. You have a lot. I love this thing. Actually, I encourage our leaders. You should read this document. I printed it off. It's actually great reading. It's not complex. Really great reading. Okay, another one you have is strengthening our national defense. And this is one where I think that during the Obama era, I had national security experts talking about the decisions made about funding for our national defense, funding for our equipment, funding for our troops. There was a sense under 8 years of Obama-Biden that we weakened our national defenses. Let me just start with that. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And in what way? Is it funding or was it in other ways also?
No, not so much funding, because you can just throw money at something, but it doesn't mean you're improving it or making it better. It's sort of like welfare. So just because you vote for money for defense doesn't mean you're really improving defense. It's really a case of strategy. What are the threats we face as a nation? How do we deal with those threats? Now, if you look at 8 years of Joe Biden as the chief of the Obama national security team, which was why he was chosen as Obama's running mate, Did you ever once hear Joe Biden object to Vladimir Putin building a fifth generation of strategic nuclear missiles that are aimed at us?
Not that I recall. Yeah.
Did you ever once see Joe Biden say, we need to have a missile defense system to shoot down those missiles if they're aimed at us?
Yeah, and you're much more obviously of an expert than I in national security, but wasn't this all the issue that related to Poland? We had funding there that was allowing us. It was helping them defend against Russian missiles, and Obama.
Exactly, and helping Poland defend us against Russian missiles, because Poland, unlike Germany and other of our larger NATO allies. Poland said, yeah, we'll put in an American missile defense system on our territory. This will be great. So Poland's showing itself to be a real ally where we're not just defending Poland. Poland is helping us defend ourselves. Joe Biden opposed that.
He did. It was actually true. That was one thing I kind of thought that the Obama-Biden team would back off from, because there was so much criticism, and also because there was no justification that I understood well that for their decisions, for their actions. It was just kind of we don't want to seem unfriendly to Russia, so we're going to back away from defending the world against their aggression.
Right.
Truly amazing. Okay, let's talk
about.
And
also because Poland wanted to defend itself against invasion by illegal immigration from all of these refugees coming in, and Poland said, we're going to save our country. We're not going to ruin it. And of course, now Poland became racist all of a sudden, and that had to be opposed also. So yeah, Biden just dumped our strong NATO allies in favor of the socialist status quo.
Absolutely true. It's just amazing. It's just amazing. Okay, I want to talk about two more things. North Korea. I think that, and I was thinking about, as these candidates position themselves, and we have all this national conversation about the presidential race. It seems like every election cycle I can recall, on the Democrat side, if they're running against an incumbent Republican, the argument always is, look what whoever it is has done. They have ruined our relations with our allies. Our allies hate us. Our enemies are emboldened. This is the argument every election cycle. And this is the argument, again, the noise out of the left. So has President Trump made things worse with North Korea?
No, he's made things better. I mean, just think, we've been in a technical state of war with North Korea since the 1950s, because the Korean War never officially ended. And rather than just doing the same old worthless, fruitless policies of sanctioning North Korea, which does have some effect, but it doesn't make things better, Trump decided to engage, and he relied on psychological profiles of Kim Jong-un, the grandson of the communist founder of North Korea, and said, let's see if we can make some headway with this guy. He gave it a try. It hasn't worked so far, but there haven't been those missile tests as North Korea had been doing before under the Obama-Biden regime. So you've got no, they're not Iranian missile tests in North Korea, because we saw from the telemetry of some of the North Korean missile tests that these were Iranian computer code coming from Farsi coming out of these things. So Biden made that worse too on the Iran side. Maybe we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But the point is, Trump has tried to do something, and he's put the squeeze on China, because North Korea doesn't do anything unless the Chinese regime approves of it. And so Trump has really changed the whole dynamic with North Korea, and given us an opportunity to finally end this conflict, and maybe even help North Korea change its own system.
Well, it's a tough thing with North Korea, because I think that people who want to be critical of President Trump say, well, Kim Jong-un is still the dictator, and life is still horrible in North Korea, and they are still unreliable, and they are alarming to all of the region around them. North Korea is alarming. But even as you're saying, even to have put pressure on China that kind of controls what North Korea is willing to do, President Trump has to a degree diffused the threat of North Korea. Is that accurate?
Right, and that's the whole idea, is to remove that threat from the region. I mean, you're going to have a terrible regime for a long time, because there are no North Koreans who know how to, what good governance is, or what the role of citizen to government is, or anything like that. So it'll take generations, even under the best circumstances, to help North Korea become a real civilized country. But it can take a much shorter time to prevent North Korea from being a military threat to ourselves and to our neighbors and allies.
Yeah. Okay, another item you have, and again, we're doing the Center for Security Policy National Security Voter Guide. And by the way, for our listeners, if you go to our website, americacanwetalk.org, on the homepage under shows, drop down list of links. I have links to all the articles we'll be talking about today, including this particular piece. It's very good in helping people think for themselves what are the national security threats we face, and how do Biden and Trump measure up. So next one I want to talk about is the Middle East. And I have been all over. Yesterday I did a little, or a couple days ago, a little piece just about the great consequence of the deal that President Trump worked through with Israel and the UAE. And I actually went at from the perspective of, because they got that deal going, there is a fund in Israel that my husband happened to be very involved with in Israel, that is a venture capital fund that's now making deals with people in Bahrain. It's like lifting everybody's potential and opportunity and life. I mean, it's a real life consequence of that deal. But I love to have you really talk about the difference between the perception of what Biden would do with the Middle East situation and President Trump.
It's night and day. You remember when Biden was vice president, the national security team had a presidential study directive that justified the U.S. building an alliance with the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, this is an Islamist organization that has the same strategic end goals as Al-Qaeda or ISIS. They just have a different way of going about it, and that's through infiltrating political and cultural systems around the world, even in our own country, and especially in Texas. So it's a Biden policy to support that subversive jihadist organization in the name of fighting terror.
That is actually true. You go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Stop me when no. So secondly, let's look at the Iran deal. Now, there can never be any hope of any kind of peace or security in the Middle East if the United States government is going to be bailing out the mullahs in Iran. They were the ones supporting so much of the terrorism in the region. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard was the one that was planting those IEDs in Iraq and Afghanistan to maim and kill our own people, killed hundreds of our own military personnel directly. Did you ever once hear Joe Biden denounce the Iranian regime for that? Never. So he was behind this whole Iran deal to funnel American cash into the Iranian regime in the hopes that the Iranian regime might behave.
Yeah, that whole concept of, we talk about this a lot on my show because I'm very focused on protecting Israel and also on recognizing who the threats are to Israel, and obviously Iran being one of the major ones. And during the time that the Obama-Biden team were negotiating the Iranian deal, in fact, I had experts on from the Center for Security Policy, I can't remember which people, but talking about as the negotiation was occurring, how frightening this seemed, that we were making a deal through President Obama's negotiations, making a deal with the mullahs that essentially enabled them to maintain their development of nuclear weapons because you couldn't inspect the areas where they were most likely to be developed, sending money over there, and all of that. It's either incumbent on presidential candidate Biden to say, that was a terrible thing. We shouldn't have done that. That was terrible to enable the mullahs that way. Or, I agree and explain himself. But he was part of that team, part of that presidential Obama administration. And he either ought to denounce it or hanging around his neck, he's responsible for it. But Iran being the number one terror exporting country in the world, and we're sending them pallets of cash, that I hope is something probably no reporter will ever ask him. I'd love to hear Biden explain where he stands on that. Was he okay with that or not okay with that? Your thoughts?
Yeah, and one, you have to assume that he's okay with it because he never once criticized it. He never said, well, everything Obama did, just because he did it doesn't mean I support it. Think of back when George Bush was Ronald Reagan's vice president. He was undermining Reagan, and his whole team was undermining Reagan the whole time. Ultimately, they took over much of the Reagan administration at the end, and they did something very different and very mainstream and swampy at the end of it. And then he had his one term to succeed Reagan. So George Bush, the elder, made little attempt to say that he was the same thing as Ronald Reagan. To the contrary, Joe Biden could do something like that, and he could have done something like that with Obama, but he instead became a yes man for everything Obama did. So, and his people did too. His present national security team did that under Obama. So all we have to judge is what he actually did in the past, and what he did in the past is very dangerous to us. More stuff on the Middle East, though, Debbie. You have the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, which everyone would say it will destroy the Middle East, it will cause a war, it will do all this. What's it done? It's like the rest of the Middle Eastern countries, the Arab countries, the Muslim world has at least been silent about it. They haven't accepted it, but they've just gone along with it and said, okay, well, we just have to deal. And so they have to deal. What comes out of that? United Arab Emirates, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, right across the water from Iran, bordering Saudi Arabia. What do? They take the lead with their neighbor, Bahrain, and then with quiet support from Egypt and elsewhere to make peace with Israel and to open diplomatic relations after the U.S. recognizes Jerusalem as the capital. And what's going to happen next? There's talk now that Saudi Arabia will have a similar recognition of Israel. And once you have Saudi Arabia and these wealthy petro countries, and then the world's largest Arab country, Egypt, making their own separate arrangements and peace with Israel. And in fact, I've spent a lot of time with the Egyptians, and they view Israel as a military ally. Egyptian security depends on a strong Israel. This happened under Donald Trump. This didn't happen under Obama and Biden.
8 years of them, yeah. You know, on a related point, and I've made this point in the show before, but I think it's illustrative of thinking outside the box, is that previously American presidents thought the only way you can help Israel negotiate deals with surrounding Arab majority countries, Muslim majority countries, is you first have to solve the conflict with the Palestinians. And you have to get that right before you can do anything else. And President Trump did try, and they came up with a deal, and it didn't fall into place the way it was proposed. But the Trump administration said, you know what, this may not ever get solved, but we're going to move forward with Israel, Bahrain, Israel, others, working with them. And actually, because these agreements are either in place or being discussed, I think it's weakened the bargaining power of the Palestinian Authority, because Israel's got this is amateur hour here. I'm a lawyer by background, not a national security expert, but I read a lot. But I want to know what you think about that.
Yeah, this completely undermined the Palestinian Authority, because before it was the wealthy Arab countries saying, "Oh, look at the poor Palestinians. We have to help them out, and Israel is oppressing them." You don't hear them saying that anymore, except for Qatar, which is this one jihadist regime right near UAE, right next to Saudi Arabia also, and they're supporting these jihadi terrorist movements around the world. They're not happy with it. But the rest of the Arabs really don't care much about the Palestinians anymore, because the Palestinians won't get their act together. They're constantly fighting among themselves, and the leadership is always stealing the international aid that's being given to help their own people. So finally, the other Arab countries have shown they're completely fed up with this.
I'm loving it. Okay. Michael Waller, I love talking with you about, again, for our listeners, it's the Center for Security Policy National Security Voter Guide, ran through 10 very big-time issues in the arena of national security, actually analyzing the conduct of Vice President Biden in his term as many years in the Senate and then as Vice President versus positions taken and actions taken by President Trump in the 3 years since 3+ years he's been president. So I want to give you a chance to wrap up any kind of conclusions or other observations you want to add to our conversation about your piece from the Center for Security Policy.
Well, yeah, if you want appeasement to Putin, vote for Joe Biden. If you want to have no southern border, vote for Joe Biden. If you want to let Iran run the Middle East and destroy Israel and just destroy the entire region and get ourselves into another war, vote for Joe Biden. If you want to support the Chinese Communist Party, vote for Joe Biden, because a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Communist China.
Wow. On that note, that's a great conclusion. Thank you so much for taking time. This was a great conversation. Thank you very much for taking time to join me today. It was fun. Thank you so much.
See you, Debbie. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, folks, you got to read that document. You'll love it. Honest to goodness, easy to follow, and very easy when you learn those points to tell your friends.